For years, the answer seemed simple. Playing PlayStation 3 games on a mobile phone was virtually impossible. Recently, however, videos have surfaced showing Android smartphones running titles like God of War 3, GTA 5, and many others. Within just a few months, the internet was flooded with tests, comparisons, and widely varying opinions. Some claim that emulation has finally reached a new level, while others argue that it is merely a demonstration that works only under very specific conditions. So, what is the truth? Has the time finally come to play PlayStation 3 games on mobile, or are we still a long way off? To answer this question, we analyzed official information from leading emulation projects and gathered results from various community tests. What we found reveals a scenario that is far more interesting and far more complex than it appears at first glance. When the console launched in 2006, it drew attention not only for its graphics but also for the technology inside. While most video games relied on more conventional architectures, Sony opted for a processor called the Cell Broadband Engine, developed in partnership with IBM and Toshiba. At the time, it was considered extremely powerful, yet vastly different from anything developers were accustomed to programming for. This decision offered advantages for several of the console's exclusive titles, but also created an unforeseen problem. Replicating the processor's operation on other hardware would prove far more difficult than it had been for consoles like the PlayStation 2 or PSP. Instead of simply copying the original hardware's behavior, an emulator must recreate every single instruction executed by the console. In the case of the PS3, this task demands immense processing power and a much higher level of precision than previous generations required. For years, this challenge wasn't limited to mobile phones. PlayStation 3 emulation progressed slowly on PCs as well. Truly consistent results only began to emerge after years of continuous development on the RPCS3 project, which still receives frequent updates today to improve compatibility and fix issues across various games. This history demonstrates that the difficulty never stems solely from device power. The console itself has always posed one of the greatest challenges the emulation community has ever faced. That is precisely why the idea of playing PlayStation 3 games on a smartphone seems so far-fetched. If even PCs required years to achieve solid results, the notion of that same technology running on a pocket-sized device seemed overly optimistic. Yet, while the PS3's architecture remained static, something else was evolving rapidly: mobile phones themselves. Faster processors, improved cooling systems, and far more efficient graphics chips began to shift a landscape that once seemed impossible to change. It was this very evolution that paved the way for a new generation of projects dedicated to bringing PlayStation 3 emulation to Android. The evolution of smartphones paved the way for something that seemed impossible just a few years ago. It was against this backdrop that the first projects truly focused on bringing PlayStation 3 emulation to Android began to emerge. While RPCS3 continued to evolve on PCs, some developers started adapting that knowledge for mobile devices. By 2026, one of the standout names was PS3 an emulator officially available on Google Play that surpassed the 1 million download mark, demonstrating that interest in PS3 emulation on mobile phones had moved beyond a small group of enthusiasts. Meanwhile, other projects, such as RPCSX for Android, continue to evolve and expand the options available to users. However, there is an important detail that many people overlook. the mere existence of an emulator doesn't mean every game runs perfectly. Developers themselves make it clear that these projects are still in development and that compatibility varies significantly from title to title. Some games manage to launch and even deliver a surprisingly good experience on more powerful devices, while others suffer from graphical glitches, slowdowns, or simply don't work as intended yet. This transparency is crucial, as it helps distinguish reality from the expectations set by isolated videos posted online. It was precisely at this point that we noticed a curious pattern during our research. The most impressive test results rarely happened by chance. There was always a common factor involved, and it wasn't the emulator itself, it was the phone being used. This raised a new question. What is it that actually enables a phone to emulate a PlayStation 3? The answer lies in a component that many people don't even check before buying a smartphone. But before revealing what that component is, I'd like to know, did you already imagine it was possible to run PlayStation 3 games on a mobile phone? Or had the idea never even crossed your mind? Let us know in the comments, as perceptions on this have shifted significantly in recent years. Some YouTube videos show games running surprisingly well. Others show stuttering, sharp performance drops, or fail to get past the initial screen. At first glance, it might seem like someone is exaggerating the results. But after comparing dozens of tests published in recent months, we realize there is a much simpler explanation. The first factor is the phone's hardware itself. Many people believe that simply looking for a device with plenty of RAM is enough, but the reality is quite different. When it comes to PlayStation 3 emulation, the processor does the heavy lifting. It is responsible for interpreting millions of instructions per second to replicate the original console's behavior. That is why two phones that look similar on the outside can yield completely different results, even when running the exact same game and emulator. We also discovered another important difference during our research. Not all content creators use the same testing methodology. Some record only the first few minutes of a game, precisely when the load on the processor tends to be lighter. Others play for 20 or 30 minutes, allowing for the observation of issues like overheating, automatic performance reduction, known as thermal throttling, and increased battery consumption. This explains why two videos about the same device can convey completely different impressions. There is also a third detail that often goes unnoticed. Emulators themselves receive frequent updates. A test recorded a few months ago might use an older version of the app, whereas another might have been conducted after important compatibility and performance fixes. The same applies to the phone's operating system, which also receives updates that can influence results. When these details aren't disclosed, comparing one video to another can lead to mistaken conclusions. It was precisely by cross-referencing all this information that we began to notice a pattern. Regardless of the country where the test was conducted, certain processors repeatedly appeared among the top performers. The phone brand didn't matter as much. What really made the difference was the chip inside. Discovering that the processor was the primary factor behind the best results solved only part of the puzzle. The next question was even more intriguing. Why do some chips handle PlayStation 3 emulation so much better than others that appear quite similar? The answer lies in the workload the processor must handle. Unlike a standard Android game, a PlayStation 3 emulator must continuously interpret instructions designed for completely different hardware. The greater the chip's processing power, the more instructions it can typically translate in real time. In the most recent tests analyzed for this video, the best results appeared most frequently on devices equipped with the Snapdragon 8 Elite and Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. Across various channels and independent tests, these chips managed to launch more games and maintain a more stable experience than previous generations. This doesn't mean every title runs perfectly, but a clear pattern emerges. When it comes to PlayStation 3 emulation on Android, Qualcomm's high-end processors currently lead the pack. Close behind are chips like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and MediaTek Dimensity 9400, which also deliver strong performance in many titles. Depending on the game and the emulator version, the performance gap compared to the newest models can be minimal. In contrast, devices equipped with mid-range processors, such as the Snapdragon 7 series, or entry-level MediaTek chips still struggle to maintain a stable experience with more demanding games. While they can often launch the game, they frequently suffer from performance drops, overheating, and automatic processor throttling after just a few minutes of use. Another interesting detail emerged during our research. Many people associate gaming phones with vastly superior performance, but the difference isn't always just about raw chip power. Models like the Red Magic 10 Pro and ROG Phone 9 often sustain high performance for longer periods thanks to more efficient cooling systems. While some conventional smartphones throttle processor speeds to manage heat, these devices manage to sustain high performance for longer periods. With a task as demanding as PlayStation 3 emulation, this difference can directly impact gameplay stability. But that still doesn't answer the question that has likely been on your mind since the start of the video. Which phone is actually worth getting for PlayStation 3 emulation today? After comparing tests published by various channels using recent versions of the leading Android emulators, certain devices consistently appeared among the top performers. It is important to note that this is not a list of the fastest phones on the market, but rather of those that demonstrated the greatest consistency in PlayStation 3 emulation. In other words, these are the models that most frequently succeeded in launching games, maintaining stability during gameplay, and encountering the fewest issues throughout the analyzed tests. At the top of this group are devices such as the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, Red Magic 10 Pro, Asus ROG Phone 9, and Xiaomi 15 Pro. All of them utilize recent versions of the Snapdragon 8 Elite and share a key characteristic. Beyond raw processing power, they can sustain that performance for longer periods without drastically throttling the chip's clock speed due to heat. This makes a significant difference, particularly during extended sessions where emulation demands peak hardware performance for minutes on end. Just below them are devices equipped with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 and Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which also delivered very positive results across various tests. Depending on the game, the performance gap compared to newer models may be minimal. With less demanding titles, many users would likely not notice a significant difference in the experience. However, with more demanding games, the newer models tend to maintain greater stability, especially after several minutes of continuous play. When looking at mid-range phones, the picture changes considerably. Models like the Poco F6, equipped with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, can deliver surprising results in certain titles, making them an attractive option for those wanting to try out emulation without investing in a flagship device. However, performance becomes less predictable. One game might run smoothly, while another suffers from frame rate drops, occasional freezes, or graphical glitches. This does not mean these phones are poor devices. Rather, it highlights that the experience depends much more heavily on the specific game being played. After analyzing all these devices, it became clear that buying a more powerful smartphone significantly increases the chances of a good experience. Yet there is still a factor capable of completely changing the outcome. Two users with the exact same phone can have totally different impressions simply because they chose different games. But there is a factor that can still completely change this outcome. The tests also revealed another very consistent pattern. Not all games pose the same challenge for emulation. 2D or less demanding games tend to yield the best results. Titles like Rayman Origins, Limbo, and Terraria frequently appear among the community's most stable examples, especially when running on devices equipped with the Snapdragon 8 Elite or Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. This doesn't mean they run perfectly on every phone, but it shows that it is already possible to find experiences very close to expectations on high-end devices. When we move on to larger games, the picture changes. Demon's Souls and GTA 5 can already deliver promising results on some high-performance smartphones, particularly with the latest emulator versions. Even so, performance fluctuations, minor graphical glitches, or speed drops are common at certain moments. These games clearly demonstrate how much emulation has evolved, while also highlighting that there is still room for improvement. Among the most demanding titles, the situation remains challenging. God of War 3, The Last of Us, and Uncharted 3 repeatedly appear as the games that tax the hardware the most. In various tests, they manage to launch and even reach playable moments, especially on the most powerful phones. However, they also exhibit performance drops, occasional crashes, and limitations that prevent a fully consistent experience from start to finish. This doesn't mean these games will never run better, but it shows that the evolution of emulation is still ongoing. Therefore, the answer to the question posed at the start of the video finally becomes clear. Yes, it is already possible to play PlayStation 3 games on a mobile phone. However, the experience still depends on a combination of a good emulator, a powerful processor, and realistic expectations regarding the chosen game. Emulation has advanced much faster than many imagined, and all signs point to continued evolution in the coming years. What once seemed impossible is now a reality for a number of titles. It's not quite a full replacement for a console or PC yet, but it has definitely moved beyond being just an experiment. If you've tried a PlayStation 3 emulator on Android, let us know in the comments which phone you used, which game you tried to run, and how it went. These experiences not only help others in the community, but can also serve as a basis for future updates to this research as new tests and emulator versions are released. And if this video helped you better understand what's actually possible with PlayStation 3 emulation on Android, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.